firstly, Jake, thank you so very much for doing this. Really appreciate you taking the time and doing this session. Now, you're one of the OGs in the space, and I do believe you have quite a lot of experience in the Bitcoin cryptocurrency and now Decred space as well. Now, before we get started, Jake, I wanted to check, how has your day been so far, and what's the weather like in Florida, which I believe is one of the best cities in the world right now, isn't it?
Well, Florida's a nice place to live. The weather here is pretty decent. We're going through a little cold snap. I live in the Tampa area. It's nice. I'm glad that it's not quite as hot as it has been. There's been quite the heat wave going. So, it's been over 90 Fahrenheit for, 6 months or something. So I'm keen for the temperature to come down a little bit. I can't speak to what the temperature's like there in Dubai. I'd expect that, it's similarly warm.
It is ridiculously warm, yeah.
Yeah. And then, I don't know, I was pruning some trees earlier today. So, try to stay outside and stay healthy.
That's absolutely great. Thank you so very much for that. And before we get into Decred, Jake, can you just share a brief history about yourself? Because in my Crypto and Coffee Day podcast, most of my listeners are CTOs, CEOs, and founders. And most of them are from Dubai, and some of them are from US as well. I'm sure they'll be quite intrigued and definitely want to know quite a lot of things from you. And I'm sure they'll learn quite a lot of things from you as well.
Sure. I'll give you a little bit about myself. My background is I've been in the cryptocurrency space since basically end of 2012, early 2013. And I'm not myself a software developer, but I run a team of software developers. I'm effectively a project manager. And so I've been building Bitcoin software. We built BTC Suite, which is an alternative, full node implementation of the Bitcoin network. It has been, since actively reused in LND, the Lightning Network Daemon from Lightning Labs. And, we worked in the Bitcoin space for quite a while, and we found cryptocurrency is fascinating. It drew us in, and we had previously worked on, data privacy and what effectively amounted to sort of like sovereign data storage. Data storage where you held the keys and whoever was actually storing the bits did not. So that was our lead in. So the idea of money where you hold the private keys and somebody else can see the public keys is sort of, it's a natural extension of what we were working on previously. So we got into the space. We had pivoted away from, secure storage because it wasn't, basically if you didn't have a huge amount of VC money, it wasn't going to happen. So we ended up in the Bitcoin space, which we found fascinating. But what we found is that after a few years, basically 2013 through 2016 is that the Bitcoin space, even at that point, and that was relatively early on, was pretty strongly centrally planned. So if you weren't a member of, say, Bitcoin Core or one of the people who was there from 2010 or 2011, things were already clicked up pretty hard. So what I didn't realize is that I was coming in and I was basically going to permanently be an outsider in that community. So I, after seeing how that started going, I thought, well, the solution here is to create something of our own, and then, we can run that ball and we won't have to deal with the constantly being outsider problem. And that's where Decred came from. The idea came from a paper for something called Memcoin 2 from 2013. We started building it in February 2014, and then we publicly released it in February 2016. So we've been running Decred since, and we took our developers that, were working on BTC Suite, and we moved most of them over to Decred. And that's the rest has been kind of history. So I've been in the space for, I think we're getting towards 11 years now.
That's absolutely fascinating story. And as I mentioned here, you're one of the OGs in the game. And it's great to know that, the history of Decred or some elements of it definitely goes back to the later part of 2012 as well. So thank you so very much for that. Now, to our listeners, can you tell us what is Decred and what is it that you're trying to do in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space?
Sure thing. What drew us into the space initially was Bitcoin. And at the time, I probably wouldn't have articulated it the same way I'm articulating it now, but what drew me in was the notion of sovereignty. That is financial sovereignty. That is, you have value that you can store and send. You can send it to pretty much anyone, anywhere, and no one can, arbitrarily turn it off. And that stands in stark contrast to the way it works at a bank, where it's, you have a permissioned entry in a database, and somebody can go, I don't like you, for whatever reason, we're going to turn your database entry off. So that spoke to me. And what I came to realize with my interaction with, with the Bitcoin community was this idea of sovereignty needs to be extended. That is, that being sovereign over your ability to store and transmit value, that's just one aspect of, of digital sovereignty. So with Decred, what we try to do is we try to sort of build on that notion of digital sovereignty and expand it to other contexts where it's relevant. Like here's something that's come up in Bitcoin a lot is, right, this idea of who's in charge of Bitcoin, who gets to set the consensus rules. So, there's always got to be developers that write the software, but then how do you deploy it? Do the miners control it? Do people riot on the blockchain with like a user activated soft fork? Well, what we decided that there needs to be a stake component to resolve disputes on the chain. So that was really the fundamental first step we did with Decred. And then from there, we built other sort of layers of user sovereignty on top of that. So users are sovereign over the budget from our treasury. They are sovereign over the consensus rules that activate on our network. That is, that if the stakeholders in the network don't approve of a consensus change, it isn't going to actually, be implemented. And further, then there's other layers of sovereignty, like, for example, privacy. As I know that different jurisdictions have different takes on privacy on chain. Our privacy is optional. It's not, it's not opt out. It's opt in. So the privacy aspect we felt was important because if somebody can always, let's say you go to a coffee shop and you spend, $1 to buy, or, a few dollars to buy a coffee. Well, do you really want that person to be able to estimate your net worth on chain, using chain analysis? I don't think most people would expect that, but that's the way things work. Especially, it's bad with UTXO chains like Decred and Bitcoin, but it's even worse with account ones like Ethereum. So this idea that, privacy is a form of sovereignty because you want to be able to, spend your money without somebody going, aha, I know how much money you have, like, in total. And then, we've gone past there, which is that there's also things like beyond privacy is like, well, how do you make privacy something that doesn't involve a server? So, we're continuing to evolve as time goes on, but our real push is sovereignty. And then we have a treasury so that we can actually build stuff without having to solicit venture capital money. So, most of these networks, it's like there's a foundation, and then the foundation gets a whole bunch of money, and then they have to manage that money, and it's very centrally managed. Our treasury is on the network, and it releases funds according to the will of the stakeholders. Stakeholders have to vote to have the funds released from the treasury, and that's an ongoing process. So that's sort of, that's where Decred is and where Decred's going, which is that it's a more sovereign form of money. And, we refer to it as money evolved in that sense. We're taking that sovereignty and running it to its natural conclusion.
Money evolved, that is beautifully said so far as, the explanation of Decred is concerned. And one question what I wanted to ask is regarding the treasury. So if it is done on chain, all of the audit is available for absolutely anyone to see as well, right? That is, I believe, one of the advantages that you have, let's say, over foundations, that they do the audit separately.
That's correct. So that what you can see is that we have a special account on our network that we had to basically do consensus work to add, and it's the treasury account, and then there's a certain amount of Decred in it, and then every time that it gets spent, everybody can see how much is being spent. So it's not a piggy bank to go to the casino with. It's it's basically fuel for the rest of the construction of the project.
Absolutely. And what our listeners should do is they should definitely check out your project, because one of the visions of the Prince of Dubai, that is Sheikh Hamdan, is for Dubai to be the #1 city in the world so far as Web3 is concerned. And based on what you're saying, that is a perfect use case of Web 3.0, isn't it? So absolutely fabulous stuff. And I was going on via YouTube, and I do remember watching a video. This was done by Coin Bureau. And he pretty much explained, everything that you said. So absolutely beautifully said. And what I wanted to ask next is, Decred is known for its unique hybrid consensus. And this is the area where proof of work and proof of stake kicks in as well, right?
That's right. So what I had mentioned this earlier, which is that the main feature that we launched with, in early 2016, and the reason we launched with is because it's very difficult to add after the fact, is this hybrid proof of work, proof of stake consensus. And, with that hybridization, we acknowledge proof of work works. There's a reason people use it. It's functional. It takes computation and uses that to settle arguments. Who has more computers is how is how you settle an argument, and then you make the chain move forward. But then we added the proof of stake component in because ultimately we knew that governance of the chain would most reasonably be accomplished by proof of stake. That is, that the people who are the miners shouldn't be able to go, well, I'm the miner, so I can dictate everything. We've seen how that plays out on Bitcoin. It's a poor governance mechanism. So we were like, well, what's the next step up from proof of work? It's proof of stake. And then so we blended the two together. We blended what we knew worked, which was proof of work, and what we thought would work better in the longer term, which was proof of stake. And we did that right up front because we knew that if we tried to, say, launch with proof of stake and then do this blending, that it would be a lot more technically difficult, and B, a harder sell to the community.
Now, I'm pretty much sure that a lot of the Bitcoin maximalists, they would like the first part of the explanation that you said, and a lot of the Ethereum developers, they would like the first part, and at the same time, they would like the second part of it as well. Now, could it be possible, or am I right in saying that, let's say, if I have a lot of mining stake involved, and if I'm a person in Decred who's into proof of work, because of the Decred or incentives that I get, I can also be the highest staker as well. Is that a possibility, or is that something completely different?
No, that's most definitely a possibility, and to some extent we have seen that. That is something that we have a history, which is that originally when we launched our proof of work, proof of stake treasury split was 60-30-10, so majority mining, minority stake, and then a fixed 10 for treasury. Over time, and in the past 2 years, we've actually changed the subsidy splitting. That is that we've gone from 60-30-10 to 10-80-10, and then we've gone even further, and we've gone from 10-80-10 to 1-89-10. And so, you mentioning the miners is really, it's very relevant here, because what we've actually experienced is that whoever it is that has mined all this Decred, and I say whoever because I'm not exactly certain who it is, they don't seem to be a fan of positive price action for the project. So, we've learned that the hard way, and so correspondingly, what we've observed is that there is a large contingent of stakeholders who are also miners. So we have literally seen this, and so they wield substantial power, but it's balanced. That is, that if they want to stake, they have to keep those coins and not sell them. So there's a trade-off.
Yeah, and in hindsight, it is kind of like the positive elements of proof of work and positive elements of proof of stake as well, so it's definitely a balance. Now, on your website, Jake, I did see a news about Bison Relay version 0.1.8 decentralized e-commerce, which I believe you guys are ushering into. So can you tell our listeners what it is, how does it work, and how does it make decentralized e-commerce a much better place?
Sure thing. This is a little bit of a longer explanation than anything else. What we've seen is something. We've had issues with our project account on Twitter. That is, that it used to have a certain amount of reach, and somebody somehow, via whatever means, turned the volume down on it. And that was obviously, that was a troublesome experience for us. In addition, I've been a system administrator. Like, I install and maintain servers. I've been doing this for like 20, I think I'm at the 21-year mark now of installing and maintaining my own machines. And so I've been doing that for a very long time. And then I've also, with all of this cryptocurrency stuff, I've been experiencing cryptocurrency and been like, okay, well, we're doing a lot of cool stuff, but how do you go from sort of like the speculative thing to the really, utilitarian component? And so Bison Relay is an attempt to do that. That is, that if you look at a lot of the modern telecommunication protocols in play, there's people talk about the web, and then there's people talk about like Web 3.0. Is if we talk about maybe Web 2.0, or just the web as most people perceive it, what it ends up being is that you might just think, oh, it's the HTTP, like it's the hypertext transfer protocol. There's more to it though, because think about it. Every website you go to, there's email addresses, right? So it's HTTP, SMTP, and then you have to have bank card processing, and then then there's transport layer security, And then there's DNS so that you know how to get to all these things. So there's all these protocols that are glued together and really comprise the web as most people know it. And what we felt is or really me specifically, I felt like this is sort of a junk tech stack. Maybe there's a way we can combine all of these things together. That is, A, our problems with social media, B, the problems with the broader architecture of what people currently know as the web. I mean, the web is the biggest software platform, in the world currently. And, I know that there's a lot of action on Ethereum, but it's like, actual commerce going on is really almost primarily going on the web. And then there's all of these things going on in cryptocurrency. How can you make cryptocurrency really, a utility? So what we did is we combined these things. So we made a single protocol, which we refer to as Bison Relay. And the Bison Relay protocol allows people to communicate. And what it does is there are no accounts for users. B, every message you send involves a micropayment via the Lightning Network. And so the reason we did this is that if you don't do that, what's to stop? If there are no accounts and the data is just flowing back and forth, what's to stop me from just being a jerk and spamming? So the micropayments are a means to like an anti-denial of service countermeasure, but it also ties into cryptocurrency, and then it makes money in this protocol effectively a native asset. Whereas like if you're on the web, you want to process things, you got to use a bank card, you have to set up a merchant account, the merchant account has to deposit into a bank account, and and then you got to pay all these fees, and then, you're not allowed to sell this or that because, because of the terms of the merchant agreement. So there's all kinds of constraints placed on people, when it comes to, sort of traditional web. I mean, in the United States, at least, say Operation Choke Point that occurred under the Obama administration in 2012 to 2013, or really 2012 to 2016, is they basically went to banks, the government went to banks and said, we don't want these businesses to be, to be bankable. We don't want you to be able to run these businesses online. And the banks turned these people's merchant accounts off. I know several people who have had this happen to them. So then, there's a censorship aspect to it, and then there's also a technological aspect. Something that a lot of people may not be familiar with is that, remember how I mentioned those protocols like HTTP, SMTP, TLS, and then bank cards and DNS? These are old protocols. These are things from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So a lot of this stuff is really kind of, it's broken by design unintentionally just because it's so old. It was like, people were like, well, I want to read papers. I want to read physics papers, at university. Well, there's HTTP. And then it's like, I want to be able to type a word in and get to a website. Okay, that's DNS. And so each one of these things has subtle things that are broken and allow people to get their communications compromised. So what we did is we just basically said, let's just fuse all that together and make that into Bison Relay. So what you can do now with Bison Relay is what we started with what is effectively a secure messaging and social media platform. So you can have a trivial amount of Decred, like 0.003 or something Decred, and you can open a Lightning channel and then you can communicate with your friends, and it's fully private. That is that none of the information that you're communicating is seen by a server, and the server doesn't even have the metadata that they normally would when it comes to communicating. Normally a server, in order for me to get my messages to you, George, I would normally need to say, I, Jake, am sending information to you, George, right? And so the server sees that because it has to route it. Well, in our case, all they see is I upload data and then you download data. There's no metadata that tags it. So that's like, basically we went as literally as far as you can technologically to prevent censorship and also give people privacy. And then what we did is then to prevent people from spamming that service that has those nice properties, you add in micropayments. And then what you can also do is, obviously, once you can start making secure messages, you can start doing social media and, just like you pointed out earlier, e-commerce. So e-commerce is sort of an extension of this system that's a generic communications protocol.
And something similar to that, I'm not sure if you know about Bitfinex is the USDT. They have launched something similar protocol as well, where you can do communication peer-to-peer, so even video chatting can be done. I'm trying to recollect the name for that. Now, one question what I wanted to ask is, let's say if I were to set up a peer-to-peer communication, is there any cost associated apart from, the microtransaction? is there any transaction cost that Decrypt blockchain ecosystem charges? So because the reason I wanted to ask this is, pretty much sure you've overheard about this project called as EOS. They wanted to launch Voice, which was essentially Twitter on blockchain, but that completely failed. And I very specifically remember speaking to Dan Larimer, and he said that per person, it would cost them $5 to get them on board, and they're willing to bear that cost. So is there like a cost associated just to onboard one particular user?
Well, I mean, like for example, like I was saying, the way the protocol works is that you need to have an active Lightning Network channel on the Decrypt network. Now, what we've reduced it to is that I could literally send you I think it's like 100-character text string. You run the client, you enter that text string, and then it will start you with a small amount of funds, and then it will open the Lightning Network channel. So in terms of the cost of onboarding, it's trivially low. We could throw a number out there. 0.02 Decred is worth, I don't know what it is right now. Was that
definitely less than $5 by year?
25 cents. And then it doesn't really cost anyone anything as much as like saying, hey, if I want to have secure communications with somebody, I can be like, let me burn 25 cents and get you going. So, it's not like it really, that money needs to be paid to anyone, but somebody needs to have it so that they can start firing the microtransactions. I feel like one of the things that there's been a number of other platforms that have done this or started to do this, that is integrating Lightning Network with, communications. And they've done it to varying degrees. But let me give you an example. I think one of them is Juggernaut. And what it will do is it will send, the messages over the Lightning Network explicitly. And so I feel like that's a little bit of a layering violation from a software perspective. It also has some not great properties that, that go with it. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but from a microtransaction perspective, I feel like microtransactions are literally the only way forward when it comes to tightly binding communications and blockchains. That is, you cannot do this on chain. There's not enough space, and the latency would be awful.
That is great. And that again, once again, I think it is a perfect use case of Web 3.2. And if, let's say, this project succeeds, let's say if we have a decentralized economy, are we going to be in a position to, let's say, buy and sell things purely peer-to-peer? Is that a possibility, let's say, in the next couple of years?
Yeah, and so, I feel like, there are examples of things like, say, Open Bazaar, where it's a specific network specifically for this stuff. And what we did, differently is that we were building this really to kind of, more as a generic communications protocol. And then you go, okay, well, what's the biggest communications protocol in use right now? It's HTTP, it's the web, right? So then you go, okay, let's take the web. What do they do on the web? Well, people have websites. They sell stuff. And it's like, okay, well, we could also do that on Bison Relay. And I feel like, when we're talking about peer-to-peer economy, that could definitely happen. But it's a question of adoption. And I also expect it's one of these things about, people's priorities. That is, a lot of people prioritize just, click, click, click. They want everything to be fast, fast, fast. But on the back end, what they fail to realize is it's like, well, there's 10 switches. 10 people can each hit one of these switches and turn your stuff off. So, that's obviously an undesirable sort of architecture. But I think that there's a certain amount of time and realization that it takes for people to see that, like, oh, this is a problem. And I think we're sort of societally going that direction. It's hard for me to speak to how things operate in Dubai, but in the United States, the censorship problem went from sort of like, hey, we'll censor people here and there. It's kind of like a hush hush quiet thing to like, oh, if you oppose our narrative, we're going to turn you right off.
Absolutely correct, 100%. So far as Dubai is concerned, it's pretty much the same as Florida, to be honest. I would say it's exactly the same as Florida, including the weather, at least towards the later part of this year. Now, one question what I wanted to ask, Jake, is regarding privacy. And privacy is absolutely critical so far as cryptocurrency is concerned. So what privacy features does Decred offer? And how do they compare to, let's say, different privacy-preserving protocols or cryptocurrencies?
Sure. So maybe the best way to approach this would be to say, what is everyone doing in terms of privacy? There's really two or three main sort of, divisions of privacy, in the cryptocurrency space. One is coin join based privacy of various types. Decred is included in this, but we do it differently. And I feel like ours, as far as In the CoinJoin space, I would argue that we are the top of the CoinJoin space in terms of sort of the privacy tech. Then there's another bracket, which is the ring signature, the ring signature crew. And I guess there really is a fourth one. So there's the ring signatures, then there is Mimblewimble, which is sort of like the transaction gluing, and then there's full-on, ZKP, zero knowledge proofs. And so we opted for a CoinJoin type system because of its complexity relative to the other ones is lower. So that, if you're doing ring signatures or what do they call them? What is it?
Is it signature sharing?
No. The ring signatures, those are the ones that Monero uses. They use, Ring CT, Ring
CT, okay.
Yeah, so they use Ring CT, and that's Ring confidential transactions. So they use Ring signatures, and then the confidential transactions make the transaction amounts opaque. So that's a cool approach, but here's a challenge for Decred. In the context of Decred, if there are any inflation bugs, that is a huge problem for Decred. So to give you an idea here is that if there are inflation bugs in Decred, then the staking system can become compromised, and that's our governance system, and then somebody can literally break the project and be like, well, I printed a bunch of Decred, and now I'm going to kill the project. So that's obviously very bad. So we didn't want to obfuscate, transaction amounts. And then there's ZKPs, and ZKPs are incredibly heavy. So even though ZKPs are very flexible and they can do all kinds of things, they're also very heavy, and you also have to have a very high level of trust in whoever implements them. So, like an example would be, say, Zcash. Zcash's approach is, I think it's cool, I think it's technical, but it also depends on a bunch of people with basically masters and PhDs that are, who write the whatever they are, the arithmetic circuits that basically run the ZKPs. You better be sure there's no bugs in there, or else there could be silent inflation. There could be, basically privacy leaks. There could be all kinds of things going on there. And the average person, I'm pretty smart. I went to grad school. I got out with a master's. I don't think I would be able to audit that. And even better, finding, developers who could audit that would be like, wow, that's a tall order. So that was my perception of the privacy landscape. And then what did we do? We basically, we took the research from some people who were focused on Bitcoin they did Coin Shuffle++, and that was, Tim Ruffing and, was it Pedro Moreno Sanchez? And so they had written a paper where they described a process where it's a way to mix inputs into outputs so that everyone involved doesn't know which outputs are whose. So, and this is actually, as far as something like this is concerned, it's the simplest way to have a very strong guarantee of privacy that we can find. Then what we did is we took that and then we added post-quantum, PKI to that. So there's a post-quantum security element to our mixing process. So we combined these things, and then we also glued this into the staking system. So if you're staking, you can be a private staker, and then you can hold a whole bunch of stake and mix at the same time. So basically our mixing volume depends on our staking volume, and so those things are sort of, tied together. And it's worked out pretty well. I think it's roughly 60% of the circulating supply of Decred is private. So it's actively mixed.
Absolutely. And so far as zero knowledge proof is considered, I think apart from it being heavy, it is kind of expensive as well, if I'm not mistaken. Because in order to be fully, private, it does become ridiculously expensive as well. And the thing that you mentioned about Coin Shuffle or CoinJoin, is that something similar that Wasabi Wallet uses as well, right?
Yes, there are a couple Bitcoin services that use CoinJoin variants of various sorts. I want to say Wasabi and Samurai both use CoinJoin, but I recall, my recollection is they differ in terms of how they, execute their CoinJoin. And for us, that's the Coin Shuffle++ component of it, which is that there's extra things that you have to do when the amounts are transparent that you have to do to sustain privacy. So it's a bit tricky, but, it's a similar approach to the Bitcoin ones. The other thing that we benefit from relative to Bitcoin is that in the context of Bitcoin, the amount of Bitcoin actively being mixed is actually relatively low, because a lot of exchanges will give you guff about, hey, this is mixed. I don't know about this. So if you show up with a whole bunch of mixed Bitcoins, people can start asking questions, particularly if they have taint. and they're linked to, criminal activity. Whereas on Decred, our mixing set is very, very large. So the majority of Decred is actually mixed. So, the odds of somebody being able to go like, oh, that's no good, like is lower. But hey, somebody can also just, snap their fingers and blanket ban Decred. So, there's pros and cons.
And that's exactly what I was going to ask next. That, privacy is absolutely great. And in certain areas, privacy can be a hindrance as well. And governments, can easily shut down privacy-preserving protocols. So what are your thoughts at a macro level? Let's say, keeping in mind the different geographical restrictions, do you think privacy-preserving protocols could be a hindrance as well?
Well, this is actually, the privacy components are precisely, what you just pointed out is actually I had spoken to one of the Zcash, I think he was a researcher and not a developer, Ian Mears. I'd spoken to him in like 2016, I believe, and so that was like a year before they launched. And the plan, and even then, the plan with Zcash was to not make privacy, opt out or on by default, precisely because they want exchange listings. They don't want exchanges to not list them. Now, we actually ended up taking the same position, that is that it is opt-in. And the reason we did the opt-in process is that, if you make it default, then you're stuck. If people want less privacy for potentially regulatory reasons, depending on the jurisdiction, they don't have an option. They're basically like my understanding is that Monero has this problem, is several places have just flat out banned Monero because it's on by default. You can't turn it off. However, that makes for very good privacy when it's on by default, but it's very challenging with the regulatory aspects.
And there's another project or protocol called a Panther protocol. And I had the CTO, Dr. Anish Muhammad, he was talking about, having privacy as an option. So if, let's say, I want to go ahead and show that I have done this transaction, I have that option to go ahead and show that transaction as well.
Yeah, there's a variety. Once you make privacy opt-in, there are a lot of options. And then my understanding is that similarly, there actually is an option in Monero to do something along the lines of what you described. That is that you can demonstrate that, hey, this transaction is mine selectively, as opposed to being like, oh, here's all my transactions.
Yeah. And right now, the buzzword is zero knowledge proof. And keeping privacy and zero knowledge proof in mind, I'm not sure if you've heard about the drama between A16Z and Uniswap version 3. So what are your thoughts on, using zero knowledge proof as a way to, state that I can go ahead and use my X amount of tokens and overtake the community? Is that a hindrance as well?
So I recently had read up a little bit on this. And so what had happened, right, is that the Uniswap developers wanted to deploy their contract on, Binance, the Binance Smart Chain. Okay, so they wanted to get it on there. They wanted to use one, wormhole. They wanted to use one, a bridge and not another. Then, because of A16Z, they have an investment in another bridge. Correct. They needed to use the other bridge, and they're like, oh, we don't want to use this one bridge. We want to use our bridge so we can build our portfolio, right? So then, they tried to sort of scuttle that. And this kind of stuff is, standard fare for venture capitalists, but it doesn't really sit well with cryptocurrency people, because cryptocurrency people are kind of like, I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And, and then they're like, no, we're in charge. And so they lack a formal governance system. They have no binding, governance system. People voted on it. And then when A16C voted on it, they're the whale, and they're like, no. And then people are like, well, it's a good thing this doesn't matter, so we're going to deploy it anyway. And I feel like the aspect of ZKPs there would be, maybe the voting should be via ZKPs. And I think that can work. That can be, that's a valid way to do voting. But I think that just more broadly, it's a good idea to have privacy in general, as opposed to say just for voting. And I feel like, there's always going to be this interplay where venture capital or, big money from Silicon Valley and stuff, they want to call the shots, but they don't want to be known for calling the shots, right? Exactly. They want to be like, no, we're going to do it our way, as opposed to, but it's like in a back room somewhere. They don't want it to be like, we're going to do it our way. And then somebody's like, look, these guys want to do it their way. And then they put it on a billboard, right? They don't want that. So I feel like that's understandable. Like, that's, with Decred, we just do it all on chain. So it's like, okay, well, there's a bunch of mixed coins on chain and, people vote and people, make their decisions. So it's like, as opposed to getting angry at each other, we're just like, okay, we added privacy so that, there's no dispute about it. Whoever's in charge is in charge, as opposed to trying to be like, paint people with a broad brush because they own more than someone else, and then arguing about like, oh, is it fair that one company owns all this? And it's like, well, think about everything they invested into it. They have the most skin in the game.
Absolutely. And before we get into governance, which you briefly touched base upon, I just wanted to get your take on what is going on in Tornado Cash. There was some drama 18 months ago, and just a few months ago, they sanctioned the developers of Tornado Cash as well. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have a kind of interesting take here, and it's because when I see regulatory actions in the United States, I typically ignore the articles that are published by the trade media. And the reason is because I feel like they and like celebrities on crypto Twitter or whatever almost uniformly get it wrong. And it's because people are not reading the complaint documents. You have to read the complaint filings to see what is it that's happening. So here's my perception of what happened with Tornado Cash. Tornado Cash has had, maybe it still has, I forget, I think it might still be running, but nobody wants to use it because then they can't exchange their coins other places, is Tornado Cash had a fine idea. They set up what was effectively the equivalent of a custodial mixer. But what they did is that, and this is what you can do with Ethereum. I'd say the major innovation of Ethereum is that contracts, which are like little simple-ish machines on their chain, can take custody of assets. And so it's like, what are you going to do? Arrest the robot? So they did that. People sent, people who weren't committing crimes were mixing their coins. And then some people who were like, who were hackers, presumably. The claim is that they're state-sponsored hackers. And the claim is, okay, well, then they go there and they start mixing into this contract. Well, that's the trouble. That's part of the trouble with these, on-chain contracts, which is that you can't really control them. It's a simple machine. You put it out there. Eventually somebody's going to do something kind of terrible with it. Then, okay, the funds start moving. And then presumably at that point, the people who, the developers and people who were involved with the project were like, oh my God, this is a giant disaster. But they couldn't really do anything about it. And then here's the other part that was in the details of the complaint. In the details of the complaint, they specifically call out the way the service was architected. There were ways to interact with the contract directly that were basically airtight. That was bulletproof. Nobody is getting in trouble there. However, the way it worked, right, is that you deposit to the contract, you would receive like a magic withdrawal policy. Yeah, you receive the receipt. And if you receive the receipt directly, it's all gravy. It's good. The tech works exactly as expected. However, what they had done was to make this easier, they had created a web portal. And what they did with the web portal is, as soon as you are doing this through a web portal and not directly with the contract, the website, even if the website operators don't ever look at these receipts that pass through there, they have to relay the receipt. As soon as you touch that receipt, it's custodial.
Exactly.
And so it's like, okay, well, now they have this, oh, look how easy it is to use with this website. And it's like, well, congratulations, guys, you just shot yourself in the face. And that's that's my take on it, which is that basically it started out with, they did something, some people used it in a way they're like, oh man, this is a problem. But if they had left it just at the contract, it would have been fine. But because they tried too hard to make it easy to use, they created a scenario where the web server was implicitly taking custody over these receipts. And then you're a money transmitter. You are not doing KYC AML. You're violating all kinds of, regulations in almost every jurisdiction that you can imagine. So that really was like, it was a huge, huge mistake on their part. And I think it's something that's a testament when you're mixing. The mixing process needs to be between you and maybe a server but that server can't ever take custody of the assets. And that's that's something that we do with our mixing. There's no custody on part of the server. The server is literally a coordinator. It moves information back and forth between the peers. The peers agree on a coin join, and then boom, that gets published. As opposed to like, we're going to rely on the server to not, rat anybody out or send anybody to jail.
To be honest, Jake, I've spoken to this topic to quite a number of people, and your explanation is very short and sweet and precise. And what I really liked is that, you mentioned not to look at mainstream media or just listen to so-called celebrity crypto influencers, rather look at information from first source. So definitely brilliant take on that. Now, what I wanted to ask Jake regarding Decred is regarding decentralization, because it is a core principle of many blockchain projects. So how does Decred promote decentralization, both in terms of governance and network infrastructure as well?
Well, I mean, in terms of decentralization, the best you can really do is you create permissionless systems. So you create permissionless systems to say, like, listen, anybody can show up and participate. I mean, in terms of promoting decentralization, what we noticed, I mean, in terms of one of the things that we've done is that we noticed that basically there was a huge, and this is to your point about miners earlier, is that we noticed that a huge amount of coins had been mined, and those mined coins were being deployed in what we consider to be a questionable way, such that, listen, if we want to decentralize the project, we need to get these coins back out into the hands of people who are involved with the project, not into the hands of the people who are running these machines and then effectively using them to attack the project. So in terms of how we increase, decentralization is that one of the things that we did is, I spoke to this earlier, is we went from a lot of proof of work to very little proof of work in terms of our subsidy split. And we did that really to create decentralization. And the reason is that early on, I was under and I admit it, it's a mistaken impression that mining created sort of, it decentralized things. I would argue that, in the regime we're in and sort of the point at which people have adapted to proof of work is it's hyper centralized. And I didn't know that. And as soon as it became very clear that was, that was going on, that the solution is to dial that component down, because we want people to have access to or to get rewards for participating in the project, but we don't want it to all go to one person who maybe wants to hit us in the face with a club. So, that's one of the things that we've done. And then the other thing that we're trying to do is that I think Bison Relay is one of these efforts, which is that by creating a network that's based on microtransactions and small, and sort of a communications network, we're trying to spread the Decred around so that if people show up and they're like, hey, I think this is interesting, I just want a little bit of Decred so I can use your comms network because it's high security and it's good. Well, you can do that, and then in the process, we'll spread some Decred around to you. So, we are doing things to try to further decentralize the project. But I feel like infrastructure-wise, we have most of the pieces that we already need. That is, that it's like hardwired into our L1, I guess would be the way people say it.
Absolutely. And Jake, interoperability and cross-chain compatibility are becoming increasingly important in the blockchain space. So how does Decred plan to integrate, let's say, with other blockchain network, and what opportunity do you think lies ahead?
Well, the way we've been approaching this is since mid-2018, I had some sad experiences interacting with exchanges that wanted, comically large listing fees. Okay, so as a function of that, I felt like, well, you should be able to exchange cryptocurrency. It should cost basically nothing. And what we did is we created our own decentralized exchange called DCRDEX. And the way it operates is that, there are a few other chains out there that operate like this, that they do atomic swaps. So what they do is that they do a cross-chain atomic swap. That is that you take, it's like a 4-step process. I won't bore your listeners with it. But what it amounts to is there's an atomic way to swap, between most chains, because not every chain has the smart contract infrastructure to do this. So the decentralized exchange is something that we've been running since late 2020. So it's been in production for roughly 3 years at this point, and it works great. I mean, it doesn't, it doesn't get the most action, but nobody's running a bot on there and just churning volume. And it's not a game. It's like, if you want Decred, you can go to our decentralized exchange. You don't have to, no KYC, AML, no nothing. You show up, you buy it, you get your Decred, and then you can stake it if you want. Or I don't know, you can try to club me in the head with it or something, right? You know, whatever suits your fancy as far as as far as your use case goes, or you can use it on Bison Relay. We've tried to sort of take the wind out of the listing process. So even if, let's say, somebody said, you know what, we really don't like Decred, and then for whatever reason it's delisted from every exchange, we still will have liquidity and the ability to go between Decred and other assets. We support, let's see, I think we do like Doge, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin F, and then Zcash as well. Now, these pairs don't see a whole lot of volume, but again, you know, we're not churning bots, and we're not in the business of really charging fees and trying to monetize it from a fee perspective.
That's absolutely great. Now, right now in the corporate world, the buzzword is sustainability, and even Decred has a long-term vision for sustainability. So can you discuss the project's treasury system, and how is it being used to fund development and other initiatives?
Sure. So, you know, running a blockchain project is something that takes money. I learned this with BTC Suite back in like 2013. That is that, you know, I spent a couple $1 million building that software and working with the developers. And then to basically receive zero revenue from doing that, and beyond zero revenue, I would say a non-trivial amount of scorn and, private ill speak of the work was like, I've kind of had it. You know, I've more than, you know, done my share of the work to sort of, you know, move Bitcoin along, and I've had it, because it's like it wasn't even a break-even operation for me. So what we ended up doing is saying, listen, 10% of every block goes into a treasury subsidy. That then lives in an on-chain L1 consensus rule, basically, that says these funds accumulate, and the only way they are unlocked is if we receive a certain approval threshold from the stakeholders every time a draft transaction is submitted. So then draft transactions are submitted to pay people who are contractors, and the people who are contractors submit proposals to get budget to do their work on a system we call it Politeia, but it's basically our proposal system. So that's the way that we sustain ourselves, is that we don't need a steady influx of fiat money or investment dollars like, you know, say certain foundations do. What we have is we have a closed loop system with a decentralized treasury where it's effectively impossible to seize the treasury. If anyone wants to go, hey, I don't want you guys to keep building Decred, it's like, well, you can't really do anything about that. It's on chain. So your only option is to kill the chain. So this was built with sort of, you know, resilience under attack in mind, and sustainability from the perspective of, you know, there will come a day when the buck stops, and if, you know, the fiat stops flowing, a lot of projects die. And in our case, we are set up to, you know, basically cockroach protocol our way through it. That is, oh, no one's investing? Well, guess what? We got a closed loop thing. We pay all our contractors in Decred, and then, you know, and then they sell to the market as necessary to liquidate. So, you know, the process that we have set up is pretty resilient, and it's sustainable in a way that I think doesn't really line up with the ESG stuff, right? You know, the ESG game is more like, okay, we're box ticking and trying to get BlackRock to invest. And it's like, we're sustainable from the, you know, nuclear blast, everybody's in a bunker, how are we going to keep going perspective. So it's a different kind of sustainability. We're ready to weather the worst of it. And I feel like sustainability in a lot of contexts is just like marketing. And in our case, it's
Absolutely.
like, no, we're ready. We're in the bunker.
Absolutely, 100%. And now the thing, you know, which is getting a lot of adoption and news, is that of central bank digital currencies. So keeping privacy in mind, what are your thoughts about, you know, CBDCs, the good, the bad, and the ugly side? And do you think that'll be a competitor to, let's say, Decred as well?
So let's see. So I'm probably one of the people who has earlier statements about CBDCs. If you go back and you look for Cointelegraph articles, there's a number of quotes of me in Cointelegraph articles going back to like 2018 and stuff where I speak ill of CBDCs. Yeah. I don't like CBDCs because I feel like, you know, fiat monetary systems are already incredibly flawed. That is that, you know, people can turn your money off, people can seize your money, people can play games with your money, people can go to the casino with your money, even if you don't agree, and so it's like, there's all kinds of things that are wrong with the fiat system, in my opinion. CBDCs are just sort of, I see them as effectively scam B. That is that you have fiat money as it currently exists without the CBDCs. And I would describe that as scam A, and that's central banking, right? You got a central bank, you got some commercial banks. The commercial banks issue most of the credit. Sometimes the central bank issues credit if there's an emergency. And, that's how those systems work. And what a CBDC does is it goes, let's just cut out the commercial banks out of this, and so that we have one person who can hit the button and just and have credit pop out wherever they really want it to. And I feel like that system is very regressive. I mean, maybe it can work, but I think that something that's an observation from the 20th century, and this is kind of outside of the realm of cryptocurrency, is that central planning committees fail. Whether it's the United States, Russia, or the USSR, or China, or anybody, like a central planning committee is a group I would describe as a group of people who make all the decisions, but don't experience the losses when those decisions are bad. And I feel like that kind of a structure, that's most of human history has been built on structures like these. So, hey, I think we should grow grain here. No, we should grow grain there. And then you grow grain in the wrong place and everybody starves. Well, I think a natural outcome of that would probably be to execute some of the people who made the bad decisions. Now, we know how that works. If you're at the top of the pyramid, that doesn't happen. You keep on your merry way and keep telling people to grow grain where it doesn't grow, and there's no consequences. And I feel like that is, that's going to continue being a problem. And CBDCs are sort of like a hyper accelerated version of a central planning committee. It's everything's already centrally planned with central bank. No, but they're like, no, but we want it to be really centrally planned, like just a few people, and you hit a few buttons and you can like blow up the economy, or you can make the economy boom. And so I think that that's a very bad thing. That is that it increases societal instability in the longer term. It might work for a few years or even a few decades, but eventually that's going to implode, just like central banking, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And what is a bit strange and a bit crazy is that David Chaum, one of the OGs in the cryptography space, he's actually working in tangent with Bank of International Settlements, and he's working on coin signature or sharing, and he's trying to help CBDCs become more secure. So I really am not sure what the future of that is. And the next question what I wanted to ask is revolving around security and artificial intelligence. So let's start with security first, because security is absolutely a top concern in the cryptocurrency space. So how does Decred approach security, and what measures have been taken to protect network and users' funds?
So hold on. You mentioned David Chaum working with BIS. I want to comment on that because So I was, I was at the IFCA, I think that's the International Financial Cryptography Association meeting in 2016, and I saw him speak. David Chaum is brilliant. He's a brilliant mathematician. He has all of these accomplishments from an academic perspective, but I feel like he needs to own that he is not a very good engineer. And so even though the guy is brilliant, he creates these systems where it was like, I watched people tear him up when he presented. He presented, I think it was effectively like a secure comms system where if 9 people collaborate against you, they can unmask your communications. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? You wrote some of these amazing cryptography papers. And here you are proposing systems that's like people who are like half your age are like, what are you thinking? And so I think that is going to, that speaks to the CBDC game, right? You're going to bring in Chaum, who's brilliant, and you're going to try to have him make something that, isn't going to work right. Okay, so you're saying security and AI, right? Okay, so security, how has Decred secured its network? So currently, Decred uses the same elliptic curve as Bitcoin for its public key cryptography. That is SecP 256K1. And the reason that's used is because it's easy on machines. That is, you have to check a lot of signatures when you have a blockchain. So you don't want to have those signatures be really computationally intensive to check. So SecP 256K1 is good in that regard. However, in the future, it's totally possible that, hey, maybe, a quantum computer is invented, and a quantum computer that's large enough and can sustain its computation long enough can break public key cryptography. Or non post quantum public key cryptography. Some cryptocurrencies are set up in a way where if that happens, that is like the plane crash into the mountain event for their project. Bitcoin could be one of them, because if that happens, I think Bitcoin would struggle to adapt quickly enough to shift. With Decred, we could literally change the consensus rules in a matter of, I don't know, probably 6 months. So we can pivot pretty quickly. We could probably pivot quicker than say Bitcoin. But then if from a security perspective, there's a bunch of projects that would have very serious problems. Like Monero would have serious problems. I don't think, maybe Zcash would, because again, when you use these ZKPs and ring signatures and stuff, if anybody can break the discrete log, if they can defeat the discrete logarithm problem, well then, anything can happen. So with Decred, you're not going to see runaway inflation, but so there could be theft of coins. And then in terms of what we can do to address that is that we're set up so that we can shift to be post-quantum, without a huge amount of effort. That is, that we've intentionally designed everything we do, all of our operations, including privacy, are designed to be, adjustable so that they can be adjusted to be post-quantum secure. Our mixing process itself, the privacy component of it, is post-quantum secure already. We already did that. I said we should do that because it was low-hanging fruit. I'm like, guys, we can make this post-quantum secure. Let's do it. So that's done. But then the rest of it, like the signatures and then the curves over which, all of the transactions are based, that would have to shift. So from a security perspective, there's a lot of things that could happen. And then, like to include AI in this, I think one of the major threats that I see to AI is, basically, how do people describe this? Social engineering via AI. That is that the idea, right? A lot of hackers will like call people on the phone and play games and be like, oh, hey, I need you to reset my account and help me. And then boom, there's a SIM swap and, your phone's owned. So this stuff can happen, but it's like, I think that is probably going to be one of the biggest threats from AI. That is not so much passwords. Maybe it would design a quantum computer, but what would happen, what I see as the biggest threat would really be the social engineering component. Most people are not smart enough to not get tricked by AI. I mean, and something that I don't know how, my wife showed this to me. I'm not on social media so much. I'm on Twitter here and there, but she showed me all of these interior design photos and she's like, a lot of this is AI now. And I was like, what?
Absolutely, yeah. And some of them, they aren't even real, but they can create an artificial image of a person that looks real. Now, what I did, Jake, just before going in live for this podcast, I took all the questions that I sent you, I put it on ChatGPT, and I asked ChatGPT to come up with a question. So what I'm going to do next is read out the question, which is not designed by me, which is designed by ChatGPT. So the answer is kind of directed to artificial intelligence. So I'm just going to read it out verbatim. So the question is, considering the ever-changing landscape of technology and the potential emergence of new paradigm, what personal principles do you believe will be fundamental in maintaining relevance and resilience over the long term?
For the project?
For the project, yeah, just for Decred.
I think that formalizing and magnifying user sovereignty, which is, it's sort of the direction we've already been going, is really the direction that we will continue going, to create resilience for the project. Because, if you look at it, it's like, see, what do CBDCs represent? CBDCs represent one system failing and then the solution to that failure supposedly being a system that's more centralized, more unfair, and more rigged. Yeah. So basically the solution proposed by the central planners is less sovereignty for people. Whereas my take is that more sovereignty for people creates societal and, sort of financial stability. That is, most people just want to get along. People want to be friendly with each other. People don't want to fight. People don't want to, argue all the time. People want to get along. And how do you, and the way you do that is not by taking away everyone's rights, The way you do that is by creating a reasonable set of rights and being like, let's respect these rules, and then we can all get along and not punch each other in the face and stuff like that. And I feel like that's sort of the direction in terms of societal evolution things should be going. And, my hope is that it maintains, relevance. I think that we're in the fourth turning, as far as I'm concerned. And that it's going to be, I'm expecting turbulence for the next probably at least 10 years. And what better way to try to improve things in the context of turbulence than to stabilize them by doing reasonable things and giving people reasonable rights, and then binding those rights using cryptography as opposed to force, threat of violence.
That is beautifully said. I really am liking this answer. And Jake, looking ahead, what are the key milestones and development that Decred community can look forward to in the next coming, let's say, years or in the next couple of years?
I think the next one we have in the pipeline is we have peer-to-peer mixing. That is, that our mixing currently uses a server as a coordinator. There's no custody involved, but that's still a single point of failure. If somebody forced us to turn it off, we would have to turn it off. But if we make it peer-to-peer, nobody can really turn that off. Somebody can always be like, hey, I'm listening for mixing transactions. So that's one of the things that people can look forward to. We will be doing some interesting things with we're gonna do our own take on NFTs, and we're gonna do it in a way where we try not to get a whole bunch of junk on chain, because I think that's a classic problem with cryptocurrency, which is everyone wants to stuff things on chain, and it's like a chain is a highly replicated database that's very expensive to store things in. You shouldn't take your images and your videos and stuff and just cram them on there. I understand the desire, but we can find somewhere else and another way to store that information without it becoming like part of the blockchain. And then something that we're really going to be focusing on Bison Relay going forward. So I would say expect that to show up on mobile imminently. We're working on it. We expect there's going to be a little bit of complexity getting onto iOS because the Apple Store has some issues with anything that involves payments. They want their cut. So
correct,
that's messy when it comes to cryptocurrency. It's like, wow, are we supposed to do privacy? That means you need to know every transaction everybody's sending, and then you want your 30% or whatever. So that's what people have to look forward to in the next. Most of that's going to be, I think that's going to be within a year.
That's great. And you've already touched base on, the Apple charging a higher fee. Apart from that, are there any other challenges that the project is facing, or any other hindrances, and how do you plan to overcome them in the near future?
I think some of our biggest hindrances are really what it comes down to in the cryptocurrency space is that there are a very small number of fiat centralized exchanges that basically take fiat deposits and allow you to sell your cryptocurrency for fiat, and they are hyper relevant. That is, that if you are not on these exchanges, your liquidity is very much constrained. That is, if someone wants to invest in Decred, they have to go buy Bitcoin and then exchange the Bitcoin for Decred. And in some cases, they have to do that through our decentralized exchange, because it's difficult to do that through other exchanges. So it's a tricky process, this whole the whole exchange management thing. That is, we've done everything we can do with the DEX, but when it comes to these major fiat centralized exchange listings, if we could get these, things would obviously be a lot easier for us. Whether we'll get them, it's a big question, because getting these listings is very much an insider based process, and it's also very financially intensive. I think would be the most even-handed way to describe it. So people want infrastructure. They want to see market makers. They want to see big listing fees. And, does that really need to happen? To what extent, is that necessary? I think that the future is not going to be with centralized exchanges, but for now it is. And that's a major challenge for us. And I would say that, another challenge is just always, outreach, which is that, the cryptocurrency space is very centralized, both in terms of the fiat exchanges and in terms of the media. That is, that there's a few publications, who shall not be named, who basically see fit and have seen fit, even when our rank was higher, to never cover any of the work we do. And so that's a major obstacle. I think that for the space to really evolve, the media, sort of the media organization of it needs to change substantially. That is that there are a handful of nodes that sort of dictate what is and isn't relevant, and that needs to change over time so that we can sort of evolve as a domain.
I absolutely agree. And what I'm liking is, you're touching base on media. And my niece is 16 years old, and I always tell her, don't read everything that you see on the internet, because right now I think each and one of us have to become journalists. And something which you also touched base on, the case of Tornado Cash, we need to look at information from the first source. My dad, he reads a lot of newspaper, and 99% of the things that he reads is absolutely garbage and incorrect. And I have to tell him, this is what the media is saying, but the facts are completely different. Now, finally, Jake, what advice would you like to give to individuals or businesses interested in getting involved or utilizing Decred's technology? What advice would you have for them?
I would say this, if you're a developer, you're welcome to show up. We have at chat.decred.org. You're welcome to show up and hang out and talk to us and try to find some work to get involved with. We have a bunch of different repositories on GitHub where people work. We have some very talented developers that we've had working with us for quite some time, and I'm always pleased to continue finding new people. Finding new talent has gotten, I feel like the space has kind of gotten saturated. So new talent is sort of, it's relatively rare, and it takes some time to spin up on cryptocurrency stuff. So if you're a developer and you're interested, don't be put off by the complexity, but you gotta have a long attention span to do cryptocurrency, because there's a lot of moving parts to it. In terms of, investors and people and people who are interested, is you're always welcome to show up in our chats, and you're welcome to, give us the third degree. We kind of enjoy it. People will show up. Sometimes people are really rude. Sometimes people are really nice. We try to be as nice as we can and not be rude to people, but I can't speak for everybody. So,
that's absolutely good.
My parents are actually, in the same bucket as yours. It's
That's great to know. So what I'll do is, Jake, in the show notes below, I'll go ahead and mention all of the details. I'll go ahead and mention your details of the chat that you mentioned of this on Relay as well, even the social media channels as well. Now, before you go, Jake, I have two fun questions, not related to privacy, security, or cryptocurrencies, on a general question, and this is something which I tend to ask all of my interviewees. The first one is, what genre of music do you like?
I really like dance music. I'm originally from Chicago. I listen to house music. I used to go out to, house events a lot in Chicago, and I really enjoy that. I also like underground hip hop.
Oh, that's great. Now, you're currently in Tampa, Florida, right?
That's right, I am.
Now, I'm not sure if you know that is considered as a home for death metal, which is kind of like an extreme form of heavy metal. Because I play death metal, and people all over the world, they actually idolize band from, Tampa, Florida. It's like, the moment even random conversation we say he's from Tampa, Florida, do you listen to death metal? That's the kind of idea that we get. Now, the next question that I wanted to ask is, any favorite sport that you like?
I'm not really a big sports person. I feel like this is something, as a man, this is an area I'm weak in. People want to speak sports to me, and I'm like, I don't speak sports. I hope the team wins the match for the town so the people can rejoice. But I mean, hey, in terms of, I like to work outside a lot. I've been pruning trees and doing landscaping work, and I feel like it's really relaxing. It's really fun. Like, there's something kind of fun about, I don't know, running drip tubing or, installing low voltage wiring. I'm weird. Sorry.
It's great. I think it works as a work-life balance. Definitely takes your thing off work, which eventually helps you to get more focused on the work as well. So, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jake, for doing this. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on, George. It's been very enjoyable speaking with you.
Thank you very much.